The entire set froze the moment the director snapped, his voice echoing through the soundstage. Act like a professional, Sandra. Cameras were, now TMTT rolling, but every eye was locked on the confrontation. TMS when a chair scraped the floor at the back. Clint Eastwood stood up slowly, his expression unreadable, and said 5 words that cut through the tension like a blade. "Oh, you just disrespected the wrong woman." Everyone went silent. Even the director TM's face went pale. No one expected Clint, legendary, reserved, and usually calm wows, to intervene like that. But what he did next did no TMT, just defend Sandra. It exposed something much deeper about power, dignity, and respect in an industry built on ego. What happened next will leave you stunned. Clint didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked calmly toward the director, eyes locked in a quiet storm. "You think yelling makes you powerful?" he said, his tone razor sharp. "Real power is knowing when to shut up and listen." The crew stood frozen, boom mics trembling slightly in the silence. Sandra looked down, visibly shaken, but Clint placed a hand on her shoulder and added, "Oh, you don't know him to talk to people like that. Not here, not ever." The director tried to speak, but Clint cut him off. "If she walks, I walk. And I guarantee this project won't TMT survive without Hiram or me." Suddenly, the director was no TMT in charge anymore. Clint had flipped the entire dynamic with one quiet threat. And then came the twist no one saw coming. The producer, who had been watching silently from the monitors, stepped forward and said, "Clint, TM's right. You're out of line. Step aside for the rest of the day." The director, face turned red, but he had no choice. Clint didn't just silenced the room. He reset the rules. After the director stormed off the set in stunned silence, everyone turned toward Clint, waiting for his next move. But he didn't TMT grandstand or gloat. Instead, he turned to Sandra and simply said, "Oh, are you okay?" She nodded, eyes still glassy, and whispered, "Oh, well, thank you." Clint gave a small nod and looked around at the crew. "Oh, no one here is, replaceable. We're TM. Respect goes both ways. That is how I work, and that TM is how I'll work moving forward." His voice was calm, but every word landed with the weight of decades in the industry. The atmosphere on set shifted instantly. People stood a little taller. The fear that had clouded the room vanished. And Sandra? She didn't attempt to just return to her role. She owned it. The next take they filmed was one of her most powerful performances to date. But just when it seemed like the drama had passed, a whispered conversation between 2 crew members revealed something that would change everything. The director wasn't TMT just having a bad day. He had a history of mistreating actors, and this time Clint wasn't going to let that go. The following morning, Clint arrived on set hours before anyone else, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a quiet woman with a folder in hand, an HR executive flown in directly by the studio. Word spread quickly. Clint had filed a formal complaint backed by testimonies from several crew members who had long stayed silent, too afraid to speak. What Clint had started was TMRT just about defending Sandra. It was about exposing a pattern. One by one, people came forward with stories. Makeup artists, assistant directors, even a stunt coordinator. They TMD all seen or experienced the director and TM's behavior. And with Clint TM's name backing the movement, there was no more fear. Later that day, the studio issued an internal memo. The director was officially removed from the project. But here, TM's, where things took a surprising turn. Instead of celebrating, Clint called for a full crew meeting. This is no attempt about revenge," he said, standing under the harsh lights. TM's about making sure no one else ever feels small on a set like this again." Sandra stood beside him, this time not as someone protected, but as someone empowered. And while the production moved forward with a new director, everyone knew how they were now just making a film anymore. They were building a legacy. Weeks later, as filming wrapped on the final scene, the energy on set was electrical, but not from the cameras. It was something deeper. Clint had not only reshaped the tone of the production, UTM'd reignited a sense of purpose in every person there. What began as a tense confrontation had sparked real change. The studio quietly updated its conduct, policies. Anonymous reporting channels were added, and Sandra, she went on to become the executive producer of the project, her first time holding that role. In the wrap-up speech, Clint stood before the cast and crew and said, "Our power doesn't now TMT come from yelling. It comes from listening, standing up when our TM's uncomfortable, and knowing when to speak for someone else when they can TM'd." The room erupted in applause, not just for the film, but for the man who TM'd, turned a toxic moment into a movement. One camera assistant whispered to a colleague, "Oh, we did now TM it, just shoot a movie. We watched Clint Eastwood rewrite how Hollywood works." Months after the film TM's release, it was na TMTT just the box office numbers, making headlines. It was the behind-the-scenes story that went viral. News outlets picked up on Clint TM's quiet rebellion, and interviews poured in from crew members who finally felt safe to share their experiences. Sandra Bullock, now a vocal advocate for safer sets, credited Clint for giving her the strength to speak out. In one powerful interview, she said, "Well, he did now temp he just saved the scene now. He saved people TM's dignity." The director who had once ruled through fear faded into obscurity, while Clint TM's legacy grew louder without him ever raising his voice. But perhaps the most poetic ending came at an award ceremony months later. As Sandra accepted her award for Best Actress, she looked out into the crowd, locked eyes with Clint, and said, "Awa," to the man who reminded me that silence can be stronger than a scream. Wah. Thank you. The room stood still, then erupted. And Clint, he just tipped his hat, smiled, and said nothing. Because sometimes the TM's all it takes.